Hello, thanks for joining the presentation today. My name is Jeff Allen. I'm the Global Pipeline Practice Lead here at Esri, and today we're going to be talking about being traceable, verifiable, and complete with the ArcGIS platform. So earlier this year, PHMSA released some new rules. We often refer to it as the mega rule. It was so large, but it's some new rules about how we manage data within pipeline organizations. And really the rule had a number of different parts. Here's a summary on the screen of some of the major pieces. We talked about high consequence areas, looking at seismic activity as a risk factor for the integrity management program. But really the thing that I want to focus on today is some of the rules and what they related to from a maximum allowable operating pressure perspective, and really on the record keeping provisions around those that part of the rule. And so in that part of the rule for records retention, it really kind of came down into two major buckets of rulemaking. One was really focused on what happens after any pipeline that goes in the ground after July 1st, 2020. So in this case, new construction. And basically what it says is that for the lifetime of any of those pipes that go in the ground after July 1st, 2020, the physical characteristics, all tests and inspection, all the attributes that we use to determine MAOP have to be traceable, verifiable, and complete in our system of record. That also includes all the small fittings and flanges and extrusions along the way. So basically any component that's under pressure along the pipeline, we need to be able to show that we have all the documentation that, that determines the design pressure of those pipes. Now, the other part of that rule really talked to what happens before July 1st, 2020. Now, at a high level, the same things apply. We need to have all the documents required, the test inspections, and all the attributes that go into the determination of design pressure, or MAOP, of that pipeline. That also includes all the fittings, the flanges, and the small components. But in the second part of the rule, what it really does is talks about what has to happen if you don't have that documentation. So really today, I'm going to be focusing on both of these parts of the rule equally. I'm going to show you really what goes into being able to manage and map all this documentation into the GIS so we can really be conformant whether the pipe was installed before or after July 1st, 2020. And so to be able to do that, what organizations are having to do is really add a higher fidelity of data to their pipeline mapping system. So no longer is it going to be appropriate just to have, a single point on the map that represents a large assembly of components. We really need to be able to go in and have all those components mapped, or at least have linkages to all the documentation that makes up those components. So it's really pushing us in different areas relative to mapping these facilities, both in a 2D and 3D sense, and as far as how much data we actually put into the enterprise geodatabase. So if we take a step back and we look at all the things that are in the ArcGIS platform, this particular problem what we're trying to solve really focuses on this data management workflow. So today we're going to be using things like ArcGIS Pro and be able to bring in these documents and share that out with the rest of the organization. Now, there are still needs for this data throughout these other workflows. So once we have this data, it's critical that we share it with the rest of the organization, whether that be mobile workers or people that are using this data to make planning and decision support. So this the underlying foundation of data is used across the organization throughout these other patterns. But if we look within the operating companies, what we usually see is somewhere in the company, either a mapping or an asset management group that is really responsible for maintaining what we would consider the system of record, or that single source to the truth about these pipeline assets. These are the folks that are really going to be on the front lines about getting all this documentation and making it traceable, verifiable, complete within the GIS. Once it's in there, what we typically see is the largest consumer of this data being the pipeline integrity group. They're the ones that take all this data from the asset database, run risk calculations, HCA, class, MAOP. And so they're really relying on that data being there and being complete and being accurate, as well as the folks in asset operations, right? So once we have this data, we need to be able to share easily with the folks in the field. So this data starts in GIS, consumed by pipeline integrity, and often shared with the asset operations. Now, we also have to be concerned with the entire supply chain, right? So we have to look at this holistically from a downstream gathering perspective, midstream transmission, and often upstream and gathering as well. And so what we've been doing here at Esri is trying to figure out a way how we can put all this data, all this pipe, regardless of where it is in the supply chain, into a single repository and manage it in one location. Companies no longer want to manage 1 or 2 or 3 different GIS systems with different types of software to be able to meet all these regulations. So to that end, the way we're doing this is we're putting all the data in a single enterprise geodatabase, and we layer on top of that geodatabase 2 tools. One is ArcGIS pipeline referencing that handles all the linear aspects of the pipeline, and the other being the utility network that handles all that connectivity. Often think of pipeline referencing as our stationed pipe, and our utility network as our non-stationed pipe, and how those all come together. So in that enterprise geodatabase, obviously we need to structure and manage that data. So what we're also supplying the industry is a template data model for both distribution, gathering, and transmission that you can freely download from our website and start to use and put data into here. Now, we've gone through this data model and enabled it to be able to handle all this document linking, all the required fields, all the details that we even need to build out one of these systems fully. So if you haven't looked at UPDM before, I would encourage you to take a look at it. It's got things for integrity, inspections, and the assets themselves. But today, what I really wanted to show you is kind of inside of that enterprise geodatabase. Once we pull back and look inside, how do we really attach documents to the physical GIS objects in the enterprise geodatabase? This is really where it comes down to being traceable, verifiable, complete, is to be able to pull all this as-built documentation, material test reports, press tester reports, put them into the GIS and make it accessible through that interface. So let's hop over to my desktop and I'll show you a couple things. Okay, here we are in my ArcGIS Pro. I've got my sample pipeline system up here. This is a sample data set that we built for demonstration purposes. It's got some gathering lines, it's got some transmission lines, it's got some facilities along the line, and some distribution at the end. So what I'm going to show you today is a couple different ways that we use those document linking to bring data into this environment and make it accessible to the rest of the organization. So my first example, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to zoom in on one of my facilities here, and let's kind of explore what we've got going on. So in this particular case, I've actually got both stationed and non-stationed pipe in the same facility. And if I turn on the imagery, it becomes quite apparent what's going on here. So I've got some transmission line. And if I go ahead and turn on my engineering stationing, you'll see those station values. So those are my transmission pipe down into my mainline valve assembly. I've got some station piping here. This looks like a launcher receiver assembly. And then I've actually got a pump over here. And in the utility network, I'm actually able to connect those together. So I've fully connected from my transmission to my station pipe, discovered that pump assembly, and back out the other side. But this is often the case where we have lots of details inside of this facility, but we might not necessarily have all the mapping data to support this. We still want to make sure that we have documentation in the GIS that represents these facilities. So here what I'm going to do is we've actually enabled one of our feature classes to allow attribute or document attachment. And the way you do this, if it's not already set up, is basically you go into the ArcGIS toolbox, you go into the data management tools, and there's an attachment object here, or attachment grouping. And so you can do a couple of things here. You can add attachments in bulk, you can disable attachments, but really what I did was go ahead and enable attachments on one of my feature classes. So basically what you do is you just select that feature class that you want to enable document attachments on, run this tool, and what happens in the behind the scenes in the enterprise geodatabase is that you'll actually get a relationship class and a table that's going to store all those attached documents. So you can see in my enterprise geodatabase, I've got attachments for my line valve inspections, my regulatory inspections, my station points. So you could basically enable any of the objects in the Enterprise Geodatabase to have document attachments. So what I'm going to do now is just going to go edit. I'm going to create a document attachment point. There's my document point there. I'll go ahead and place that, and I'll place it right here in the imagery on top of these particular attributes. And let's take a look at the attributes for that point. So I'm going to say this is an AutoCAD drawing, and it's a station pipe. So I can add some other attributes here and complete this record, but you'll see what's happened in the attribute view is I have my attribute pane, obviously my geometry, but because of enabled document attachments, I have this document attachment pane now. And so I can go in here, review any documents, and if I want to, I just simply add some documents to this. So I'm going to go in here, and here's my Wink Station pipeline details. I'll go ahead and add that and save that with a point. So now if I close that document point and I go back in it later on, let's go ahead and select that, open up the attributes. I can see that thing, I can double click on it, and I can actually pull up those detailed piping for that facility. So that's one approach because it gives me the ability to locate documents where I might not have an actual asset in the GIS and bring that documentation in here. Now, obviously, the problem with that methodology is that that documentation and any of the data that's within it isn't really discoverable through any of my calculations or any of my other processes. What I really want to do is to be able to get down and attach documents by individual objects along the pipeline. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch to another area where I have a little more detailed mapping. So this is a pump station where I've actually gone ahead and mapped both the stationed and non-stationed pipe. So here you can see I've got my linear referencing system coming here on this launcher receiver assembly and gone out to the station again. And inside of this, inside the fence here, I've got all this piping. Now, the way that we enable linear referencing and the utility network to work together is that the center line of my linear referencing is going to be my utility network pipe. And to see that, I'm just going to turn the linear referencing network off for a second. And you can see my utility network pipe really underpins my linear referencing system. So when I'm building up this, this detail, I'm mapping all my pipes first. And then where I need linear referencing support, I go ahead and create routes on top of those. So what this allows me to do is some interesting stuff. Like here, I can start mapping and managing easily this crossover piping, the station piping. I can even put this information in 3 dimensions. You can see I've got some objects even located within inside this building. But oftentimes when we think about supporting data for these pipelines, you know, one of the things that comes to mind is as-built drawings. So historically, we've taken the data from the as-built drawings, we've entered it into the GIS, we folded up those documents and sent them off to the records retention repository. But here what we're saying, because of these new rules, is we need to have in the GIS really the documents that support all the attributes that I've put on all these pipes and all these fittings. And so there's a couple different ways we can do that. And one of the ways we do that is by taking advantage of the linear referencing system. So obviously this pipe segment here on the linear referencing system, this route covers a pretty long area. You can see it's probably made up of lots of different pipe segments, but it starts here at this station and runs down to the next pump station. So in this case, what I want to do is I don't want to have to associate this documentation with every individual event along that line. I want to go ahead and associate it with this linear event. So in this particular case, what we've done was we've enabled the document linking at the linear referencing route level. So same process. I went back, I enabled attachments, I picked the linear referencing, the APR route feature class, and now I can go in, and if I look at that particular feature class itself, here's mainline valve 126 route 1, and now I can easily go into that documentation. Here's all the as-built alignment sheets where I have for this particular line. Attach those and make them available to anywhere along that line. So now anybody that's in the system that needs to see the original as-built documentation, they can simply select on the route object and then pull up the associated historical alignment sheet that was used to enter all this information into the system about this right. So the as-built documentation would be called the witness of installation document, right? This is showing me exactly back in the day what was entered into the system for that particular section of pipe. But when we really think about getting down even deeper into the objects, obviously when we think about the MAOP calculation and being able to support that, the data for the MAOP calculation really sits at the pipe level. So if I wanted to really truly know, where did the information about every individual pipe come from, I really need to step below that route level. So that's what people are now doing. They're going down into the pipe level. We'll look at individual pipe segments. And if I select this, what we've done here is we've enabled that document linking and attachment at really the pipe level. So now I have an individual section of pipe. I might go in here, and now this time what I want to do is I want to go ahead and actually add in the actual, say, material test report and the hydrostatic test that was done on that particular section of pipe. So here I add those documents. We can pull up the MTR. Now I can clearly see, if I look at my attribute data in the GIS, where did the information about the length of the pipe come from, the heat number, the chemical tests, and the chemical analysis of the steel, what the mechanical properties are. I get an actual signature certifying that this is the material that was purchased and this is the material that's gone in the ground. So this really gets to the lowest level, especially here on the hydro tests. I can pull up the hydrostatics test report. I can even go down and see the chart that was done for that 24-hour test on that particular piece of pipe. Now, one of the real challenges with this, as you can see, is that to go into the system and go to that level of detail and attach all the documents to every segment of pipe can be very, very time and labor intensive. So what I've done in this particular example is if I go ahead and just turn the labels on for my pipelines, I'm going to key off of this. Let me go ahead and turn the topographic base map back on. You can see here what I've got in this section. I've got the original pipe, and I'm displaying, the label I'm displaying is the project number of the original construction project. So I've got all my project numbers, and that's an attribute that's on all the pipes that were part of that construction project. And you can see here as well, I've got a small reroute that also has its project assigned to it, to all the pipes that were part of that reroute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that project number, and I'm going to use it to automatically go into a folder of documents and automatically assign, based on a unique ID of those documents. In this case, I've prefixed all my hydrographic and MTR, hydro tests and MTRs with the project number, and automatically assign those documents to every piece of pipe along that pipeline. And again, the way I'm going to do that, I'm going to go back to the analysis toolbox, and under our tools, we have this tool inside the attachment called Generate Match Table. Okay, so in the Generate Attachment Match Table geoprocessing tool, I'm going to go ahead and fill in some key fields here. So obviously I want to match to my pipes, so I'm going to go ahead and select that pipeline table. So this is my pipeline feature class. I'm going to select a folder. This is the folder where all those documents exist. So that's just here on my hard drive. I'm going to create an output table. So this is going to store all the object IDs of all the pipes and all the documents that it found that it could associate with them. So I'll call it match table. And I need to identify a key field. Now for me, my key field is going to be this project number, because that's the key field that I have in my pipeline database for all these pipes. And it's also the key field that I have associated with all those documents in my folder. Now I also can specify some filter options here. So if I only want to create, say, all the JPEGs or only the PDFs or only the MTRs, I could use some wildcard filters here to store that data. So once I have this set, I'll go ahead and run it. And once it's finished running, we'll go ahead and take a look at that table. So you can see in my table of contents, it created that output table for me. I can open it up and look at it. And you can see what it's done is in its match ID, these are all the object IDs are all my pipes. And using that common project name, it's gone ahead and found all the projects are associated with each of those different segments. And so once I have that match table, I'm simply going to go back to the geoprocessing toolbox, and I'm going to use this add attachments option. And this is going to batch load the data into here. So again, my input data set is going to be my pipelines. My join field on my input is going to be my object ID. My match table is that table that I just created. The join field is going to be the match ID. And the file name is going to be my match path. And I'll set this back to that working folder so I can find all those documents. Okay, so it's going to use that table. It's going to look up those object IDs, find the appropriate document in the document join field, find that file in that folder, and attach it with all those pipes. So I'll just hit run now. This will just take a couple of seconds as it reads all those documents into the geodatabase. And once that's finished, we'll go check this out. Okay, that tool's finished. And if I just go back to the map view now, I can go ahead and select on one of these pipes, take a look at the attributes. And if I look at the attachments here, I should have the attachments for my project 1, 2, 3, 4 hydro and my material test report for that section of pipe. And again, if I change the selection over to this reroute, then I'll see the appropriate documents for that reroute. And I can continue right up on down the line and see those document attachments for all the pipes in that entire system. So with just a couple clicks, I've associated all those documentation with all my pipes. I've now got really fully traceable documents that back up all my input to my MAOP process. And now I can use those for my downstream calculations. And so that's kind of the last part of the demo here is, we've shown documents attached to a linear referencing route, to an individual point, to the individual pipes. But if I look at my linear referencing layers, one of the things that I want to track in here is my calculated values for my MAOP. So these are the calculations I run against all those individual pipes to figure out what the MAOP design, test, and pressure is along these lines. And oftentimes we have documentation associated with that. Now the real value of linking these documents to the linear referencing system you can see here is as I start the reroute project, use the linear referencing tools, I draw the new pipe into the system, it's automatically going to cut out that calculation for that pipe that's no longer applicable. Remember, this pipe is either retired or removed for the system. This section here has yet to be calculated, but I can still see my documentation for my original calculation. And in this case, where I had one continuous linear event before, I have two. But if I select on those objects and I look at the attribute, I still have the reference to the MAOP report that was created when I first calculated the MAOP for this particular pipeline. So that's an example of where the linear referencing system really comes into play as we start having these long linear events with documents associated with as well. So that's kind of the last cadence to the demo. We've shown documents associated to a pipe, to a location that doesn't have pipe, individual pipe segments, the entire route, or individual linear routes that are automatically broken up as we do reroutes and replacements and repairs along the pipeline. So really valuable to be able to do it this way. Because all these documents are in the enterprise geodatabase, they're easily shareable with the rest of the organization. If I was to pull this same map up on a web map or on my mobile device, I'd have access to all those documents. I can even take them offline in the field and see them completely disconnected from the office. So again, I hope you really enjoyed that presentation. If you have any questions on this at all, feel free to reach out to me. My email is up there on the screen, and I hope to hear back from you and feedback on this presentation. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, Jeff, and hi, folks. My name's Tom Coolidge. I'm Esri's Director of GIS and Pipeline Industry Solutions. So again, Jeff, really good presentation. We do have some questions, so let's take those from the top. First question, if we have an established document management system, is there a best practice for leveraging the capability of that tool while still maintaining a strong linkage to the assets in GIS?
Yeah, so we get this question a lot, and really, when I put the demo together, I was kind of thinking along this line. Do we have a document management system, or do we store the documents into enterprise GIS? And really, both paths are completely valid. The only difference would be, instead of sort of bringing those documents into the enterprise geodatabase, we would add that document reference table. Usually it's a many-to-one relationship. So we have a single object in the GIS and then a relationship class to a table that then has all the linkages to the supporting documents. Historically, what we've done in some of the sort of older document management systems is sort of program some type of API to take a document ID and go to those systems and bring those back. But what we've seen in the more recent document management systems, that they're all sort of web-based or cloud-based and have some sort of URL scheme. So we can actually embed those URLs of those documents into that table, so that when a person in the GIS or a web viewer or anybody in the organization clicks on that pipe, they get a list of URLs. They click on the URL and it takes them directly into the document management system. So from a best practices standpoint, that sort of alleviates a lot of the having additional programming or interfacing if you can leverage a URL scheme for the document linking to your enterprise document management system.
Super, good, got it. I'm going to take the questions sort of in the order they came in, so it sort of hangs with the flow of how you presented. Next question is there a way to make those documents available to other people via a field with a link? Looking for a way to easily access them without going through the database.
Yeah, so because those documents are now part of the enterprise geodatabase, once we take that feature class and we publish it, those are going to be links that we can access either through a mobile device or through a web viewer and bring up those same documents from the underlying asset database. So the documents that are inside, the way that I had shown it, are pervasive across the platform and are accessible in different ways.
Got it. Next question, does the point which is used to attach the document should be enabled with attachments?
Correct. So in the 3 or 4 scenarios I showed, the common cadence to that was enabling document attachments on those feature classes, right? So whether it's the point or the linear pipe or the linear ranged event in APR, I'm going into the geodatabase, I'm right-clicking on that feature class, I'm saying enable attachments, which sets up that related table and that relationship class in the enterprise geodatabase.
Okay, good. Next question. This may be a bit premature, but will the utility network be able to link to documents and Laserfish, a third-party document storage system for government archives?
Yeah, so that kind of goes back to the first question as well, right? So we have sort of a decision point, where the documents are going to be stored. Are they going to be stored in the enterprise geodatabase, and basically use the Esri core as also my document management system? Or do we have another corporate system that, is beyond GIS, bigger than GIS, to store documents that we want to link into? So it's really that second question, regardless of where those documents are, we can link them into the GIS. And then if whoever has access to that document management system would then have access to the underlying documents, right? So if that system happened to be in the cloud and you wanted to enable access to people outside the organization, then that's really sort of the IT plumbing to make all that happen.
Got it. Got it. Okay. The point created should be in the same geodatabase, or can it be a separate geodatabase?
It can be a separate geodatabase, right? So the document relationship class and the table and the point feature class would all be together. But that layer could be sitting in another enterprise geodatabase. And so I can mash that up on my map as, from two different sources.
Okay. On to the next. In our network, we have a record drawing ID field for our pipes. If we enable attachments for our pipes, would we be able to reference that field and just upload the drawing once instead of once for every pipe with the drawing ID?
Yeah, that takes a one additional step, and that's a great point, because we're going to be showing that in the gas and pipeline plenary that's just happening in a little while, where we actually created another relationship class that allowed us sort of many to one or many to many, right? So we can have that single MTR stored once and then pointed back to a relationship class to all those individual pipes. So that is a possible configuration in the geodatabase as well.
Okay. The next question, I think, actually is a comment, but you might want to comment on the comment. The comment is, we prefer to use a link to a folder as documents may change and they are much more easily updated rather than monitoring attachments.
Yeah, that is absolutely a valid workflow as well, right? So this is almost in the same in line as an external document management system. So I would have a related table that would have those folder paths in it. I would put those into that related table. And then it sort of enable a scheme that when I click on that folder, it would pop up and I would see all the documents inside of it. Really what we're struggling with at this point is, especially around the MAOP validation, is really getting down and saying, okay, this is the actual document that backs up this actual wall thickness for this actual piece of pipe, right? And so a lot of people are starting at a very high level, but we're needing to go lower and lower and really get down to the individual records and which document actually supports them. And that's sort of where we're heading as an industry to be able to do that.
Okay. Our next question is, the attachment function a part of ArcGIS Pro? We're still on ArcGIS 10.2.1, and currently Hyperlink is used by us.
Yeah, Hyperlink is supported in both. I was demonstrating, because I was using APR Utility Network, I was sort of fully in the Pro platform with those attachments. But those attachment workflows have been around for a while. I haven't tried them lately in ArcMap, but they have existed beyond Pro.
Okay. Next question, you may have addressed this already, but is it best practice to include documents on the live working data or create separate feature to contain that information?
Sorry, what was that one again? Can you repeat that question?
Sorry, yeah, let me get over here and find it again because I just moved it public. Question was, you may have addressed this already, but is it best practice to include documents on the live working data or create a separate feature to contain that information?
I would say best practice these days are on the live working data, right? That's where we're heading to have that single source of the truth, the documents directly related to that pipe record. That pipe record is what's flowing into the MAOP calculation, right? So it's all linked together. But obviously, like I showed in that first example, we still need to put the documentation somewhere. If that data does not exist at that level in the GIS, then certainly linking it to either a long linear event or individual point to locate those documents is certainly a viable workflow.
Okay. Next question, the relationship class will be created automatically when we enable the attachment for the feature class? That's a question.
That is correct. Yep. So when you say enable attachments, it creates the table with the blob feature to store the document and the related relationship class to the feature that you added the attachment to.
Okay. And then next, what is the difference between hyperlink and attachments?
So when I use the Enterprise Geo database to store documents, I'm actually taking that document, reading it in, and storing it as a blob object inside the Enterprise Geo database. So it's embedded, right? With a hyperlink, all I'm storing in the Enterprise Geo database is that URL, right? So that if I click on that URL, I open up whatever system that document is stored in, and I would view it there. Obviously, if the document moves, then the URL is broken, and that would no longer be linked. So that is one of the weaknesses of the URL scheme, is that if things move around, you got to make sure you update the URLs in the GIS appropriately.
Okay. Well, that brings us to an end of the questions received. Do the questions, Jeff, prompt anything else in your mind you'd like to add before we thank people and close out the
No, I would just, kind of like to add, this is sort of a key workflow that we're all thinking through, and everything I showed today is actually just core to the platform, right? So there's no additional licensing you would need to turn on document attachments. It's there for you now. It's just a matter of setting it up and that sort of matching table and be able to bring data in as bulk, especially on things like project numbers, is super helpful to do this and automate a lot of the processes. You could take that same process and make it a geoprocessing tool that you run at the end of an as-built. So part of the as-builting process is to have a folder of all the supporting documents, and then just put the project number in there, and then it would bring in all those docs and attach them for you.
Got it. Well, thank you very much, Jeff, and thank you to everybody attended. We actually had very strong attendance, and that's really good to see, especially at this hour of the day. Thanks for starting your day with us. Lots of good programming yet to come today and later this week in the conference, so please check out the agenda and join in other things. And for now, we say thank you and hope to see you in another session later today and later this week. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.